Going to entitle this, A Troubled World. Turn with me into Daniel, the 12th chapter. We're just going to read the first verse tonight of Daniel, the 12th chapter. I'm going to read it slow because this describes a period of time that will definitely have a beginning as the world approaches the end time. The end of the whole matter is that last 7 years we call the week of Daniel. But we don't want to think that everything that involves a troublous time just necessarily lays there. If we didn't have troubled things going on in the world of society, economics, and politics, before that week could start, there would be no necessity for such an era of time, because we can say this: that week, whenever it is really brought about in the negotiating process, it's all because the world becomes so troubled and things become so insecure. World leaders are pressed to the end to do something, and naturally it is to fulfill the Word of God. I believe it is in the 17th chapter of Revelation, concerning the horns there, it says, God will put in their hearts in that day to fulfill His Word. This lets us know, brothers and sisters, there are certain things such as trends, circumstances in the overall world picture that mankind cannot avoid. They will be there irregardless of how hard we might try to change the structure or the picture. I have here tonight, and I will not be reading from these articles, but Brother Suggs down in Georgia, give me this one. This book was copyrighted in 1993. This is a group of what we call economists and social predictors that's looking at the world we live in now. Not even from a Bible standpoint. They're looking at it from the social side of things. Things that affect people, especially in the economic realm. It's more that way today than it was 500 years ago. Economic things 500 years ago could affect people to a certain extent, but it mainly affected your, we will just say, your elite realm. They had plenty of money. But the point was this: many of your overall down-the-line people live closer to nature in the first place. They didn't depend on going to the grocery store to get every loaf of bread or every slice of meat as it is today. I've read this book through about 3 times. Some of the things I believe, not because I think it's a Bible, but because I can see what's in it going to fulfill biblical circumstances. Here's another, I suppose it's called a periodical newsletter, from another group of forecasters of the social and economic trends. And they are writing almost line for line, on the various topics. I have another article here. I think I will read it to start with. This is about UN and the Child's Rights Treaty. If there is anything that will make a man and mother's blood boil, this would. To think that we've got politicians in our nation that play around with laws that affect your and my offspring. If time was to last long enough, young people, and the day becomes that you are a daddy or a wife, a mother, if such a thing is ever passed, you rest assured, all you're going to be allowed is to father and bring the child into the world. After that, really, it don't belong to you. I want to read these articles, which is pending certain approvals within our overall Senate. The Supreme Court has held that a treaty made by the President with the required concurrence of 2/3 of the Senate is, under the Supremacy Clause of Article 6, Section 2, part of the supreme law which takes precedent over contrary state laws. What this means is that otherwise valid state laws pertaining to education, the family, and so forth, which conflict with the provisions of the treaty, will be subject to invalidation. Now, in Article 3 of this, in all actions concerning children, the courts, social service workers, and bureaucrats are empowered to regulate families based on their subjective determination of the best interest of the child. This article shifts the responsibility of parental judgment and decision-making from the family to the state and ultimately the United Nations. I hope if there's anything ever blowed up first, I hope that gets it. I have as much respect for United Nations as I do a den of ants. In order to ensure state and UN control over their development, this is under Article 7, all children must be immediately registered after birth. Well, it's already going on in our nation. Article 13, under this provision, parents would be subject to prosecution for any attempt to prevent their children from interaction with pornography, rock music, television. Little children are vested with a freedom of expression right which is virtually obsolete. No allowance is made for parental guidance. Section 1 declares a child's right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers, either orally or in writing or in print, in the form of art or through any other media of the child's choice. Article 14, children are guaranteed freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Children have a legal right to object to all religious training. Alternatively, children may assert their right against parental objection to participate in occult, Muslim, or Buddhist worship service. Article 15. This article declares the right of the child to freedom of association. If this measure were to be taken seriously, parents could be prevented from forbidding their child to associate with people deemed to be objectionable companions under Article 15. Children could claim a fundamental right to join gangs, cults, racist organizations over parental objection. Parental rights and responsibilities are unmentioned. Article 16. This article gives the child a virtually absolute right of privacy to be enforced at law against all others, including parents. Presumably, this privacy right includes the right to have an abortion without parental consent, the right to all types of immoral living, the right to view obscenity within the home, and the right to obtain and use birth control. All of that summed up means, if this is ever passed by our own Senate to become a law to the whole nation, then the idea is ultimately then this is the same kind of a universal law that would be put in practice if and whenever it does become a law to be accepted by the United Nations. And I hope the thing blows to pieces before that ever gets to be. Now, I've read these articles. As I said, some of them I believe. Not because it's Bible, but because many times we read the Bible, what it says in prophecy, as we read the daily newspaper. World trends. As you see certain situations begin to develop, you know the Bible is being fulfilled. That's why I took this right from Daniel. Daniel here is a base, which tells us that at the end time, especially as the world in general is being focused in on the end time, and the overall prophetic picture is dealing primarily with Israel, her reestablishment. It lets us know the world is going to be plunged into a peerless time, a troubled time, such as there never was before and never will be hereafter. Now, some of these things will shock you. But already, in certain sections of the country, there's already a little bit of these things beginning to surface. So bear with me tonight. If I just read it from here, it would be dull. But I've tried to condense it and put it into my own terminology, the way I would word it. Looking at our world we're living in now, one of these articles is stating, by the year 2000, the economic picture within the United States is destined to wind up in peril. The other article, which comes from another source of economists and social predictors, they have used the year 1995 to 2005, a 10-year period, where we're going to see some of the most shocking changes in America's life structure, social structure, political structure, especially the economic factor, all because we are climbing close to the $4 trillion debt. That is the highest any nation on the face of this earth has ever been brought into. In fact, it is higher than much of the rest of the Western world all put together. And there is no way we can look at the future and say it's going to get better. You people that are, we will say 60 and 70, when you look back into the 30s when we come out of a depression, it's true, we didn't have a national debt then in the billions, it was only in the millions. But now then, our politicians over the last 50 years, one right after another, has somehow or other allowed certain things to become uncontrolled, never thinking that somewhere up the road there's got to be a stop to all of this nonsense. You cannot constantly borrow money and expect that one day it doesn't have to be paid back. Anybody knows when you do that, sooner or later you're forced to sign bankruptcy. Now, if I didn't believe tonight in the coming of Jesus Christ soon, things right here when you can already see the trends? It's just the way it's going on. People don't notice it. But when these forecasters of the economics and the social trends can look ahead through these changes, and they can see within the next 10 years there's going to be such a drastic change, it's literally going to kill socially, economic, thousands of people. At the same time, it will also project another element of people into a realm of a standard of life. That's the most, you might say, the most elite standard of life that's ever been lived on this planet. Let's say this. That's the way certain things have been in third-rate countries. All you have to do is go south of the border. Go to Mexico City. Go to some of them cities, brothers and sisters. You can go into where we will say the elite live. You've seen pictures of these beautiful Spanish haciendas. They cover an entire city block. That literally means when you cross this intersection of this street, you are walking alongside of a beautiful Spanish hacienda that's got usually a fence of some magnitude for security reasons. It can be a stone fence. Again, it can be wrought iron. But that whole hacienda will cover an entire city block. When you get to the next corner, you can just turn to the right, and you can walk another block, and you're still walking past this beautiful hacienda. It's not just one like that. There is sections within these cities. The rich live there. They draw their help, their servants, their yard maids, their housemaids, their gardeners from the other side of town, down where everything is run down, where some of them, even in the slum parts, they live with nothing but dirt floors. They get up of a morning, eating a very slim meal, because they don't make much. And they will walk sometime for several city blocks to do their daily task in some of these beautiful haciendas where they're rich. They can have anywhere from 2 or 3 carports strung around these places, with 2 and 3 cars sitting in there. If you don't believe it, go to Mexico City. Go to Culiacan. See some of these places. The point is this. For the past 50 years, you and I have not been told of this. But there has been a trend within our country's leadership. As they envision, they are the ones that's going to try to make this whole world a better place for humanity to live in. They don't just stop, brothers and sisters, and look at the people in the country of the United States alone. They look at everything in the world, and somehow or other they've got a vision. They want to lift the lifestyle in the third-rate countries up, at least to where we are. It's an impossibility to do it. It's just like communism. When the communists took over, by the time we come to the World War I, and we come into the 20s, it is true. Russia was Catholicism. Many of the people who were the rich people, they lived in beautiful palaces. When the communists took over, they was going to confiscate all this riches, the money, the properties of these rich people that have been made rich under the Tsar regime. When the communists did take over eventually, they rounded these people up from one end of the Russian perimeter to the other, and they got rid of them. I know that day we went up in this great big mammoth tower, Brother Sergei took us up there, 1,500 feet, right straight up a tower. And up there is a revolving restaurant. It's the tallest one of its kind in the world. As we looked out, they showed us one of the last palaces built by parts, we will say, they told what particular prince and so forth it was. Every one of that family was taken and liquidated by the communists. That palace is a memorial or a museum today of that era. But the sad part of it is, brothers and sisters, while the communists promised the Russian people a better way of living, meaning we'll take it away from the rich and we will share it with you, it didn't work that way. When they have confiscated all the agricultural land, now the land belongs to the state. All property belongs to the state. Everybody's working for the state. They set the scale of wage. You can only expect to get so much at the end of the week. It's true you're guaranteed a check. But brothers and sisters, you are guaranteed very little to have for any kind of luxury or entertainment as other people might have going on. And as you look out over Moscow, you begin to see the effects of, we will say, 60, 70, 80 years of this communist rule that has conquered people, brought her under subjection. And it's true, you got no longer the rich elite of that nature, but you got a power-crazed bunch of bureaucrats who are guaranteed a good bed. And if there is such a thing as TVs and luxuries, the Communist Party is going to be the ones to enjoy it. I think when you saw the news film of the various breakups of these regimes as she was collapsing, they took and showed pictures of these quarters where the Communist Party dwelled and lived and had their parties. What a splendor thing they had. But now then, the whole complex of Russia is falling to pieces. Her interior things that keep staying in existence. The streets are filled with potholes. Because, brothers and sisters, you cannot change from a communist economy back to a democratic and do it overnight. There's always an element of people caught between, we will say, the change. It's just almost like you take human lives and you sacrifice them on an economical block in order to be able to make a transition and a change from one way of life to another, and it's always the elite that comes out on top. Whatever class in the economical category you call the elite, it doesn't matter whether they're billionaires or they've just got a few $100,000, they're the ones that always comes out on top. Somewhere, other human beings are sacrificed to make the change for the ones that eventually is going to win out. Now, when we look at our own country, it used to be said, when the immigrants would come here from the other parts of the world, there was standing in the great harbor this image of this woman, Statue of Liberty, give to our nation by France. And how she stands there with her hand beckoning out. Send us your sick, your poor, and such like that. Brothers and sisters, that's how the nation that you and I live in tonight did eventually begin to become a nation that the rest of the world had to recognize that we were a nation over here in this new world. And we was not always going to be looked upon as some kind of a little backward bunch of hillbillies still living in log cabins and dirt floors. Sooner or later, they're going to have to realize we are the descendants of them. Because we're French, we're Italian, we're German, we're Scotch, we're Danish, we're the whole thing put in a nutshell. But I can say this. Through all the early eras of the founding of this nation and the birth of it. It didn't matter from what part of the world they came from. They eventually became Americans. And they loved it. They enjoyed the freedom. They came here with nothing. But after a period of time, they usually wound up living in a little place they could call their own. And all because, brothers and sisters, there was enough of people out of Europe from all racial sectors of it that came here for a religious purpose. I have to say, that's what God looked at. He wanted that nucleus of people that had a spiritual hunger and a desire to dedicate their lives to Him and to live in a part of the world that would not be under political oppression, and there they could see God and worship Him according to the dictates or the convictions of their own heart. And I have to say, God reached down and took a bunch of backward people that did not have much education, couldn't sail back across the waters to go to into the universities of Europe, but He put a nation together, brothers and sisters, that one day rose to be a nation to be dealt with. As the song goes, I'm proud to be an American, because I'm glad, brothers and sisters, I was born here where the gospel has been allowed to be preached. While it's been preached pro and con, negative and positive, with all of its heretical ideas, they've used the freedom of religion. They've done their evil works with it. But I have to say, God has allowed some people also to have an opportunity to seek Him and to find Him and to have an experience with Him like no other element of people throughout the history of the whole realm of Christianity, plumb back, brothers and sisters. You can say it almost until we go back to the day of Pentecost in Jerusalem. But something is going on. I have to say this, we must be getting close. All because how God looks on the Middle East. In the Jerusalem Post, many of your officials and society in Israel is beginning to express themselves to Perez and Rabin. You are killing us. You are destroying us. There's no way we can tolerate this pressure from the Palestinians. It's evidently not going to work. It's true. You and I are not the advocators. We cannot dictate the terms. It is something that God has allowed the Jews in their apostate political leadership to try at least this one time to bring about a peace process in the Middle East. But I believe with all my heart, we are just somewhere in a short interval of time away from Zechariah 12. And as Brother Allen said, as he was watching this one program the other night, there are many of the Jews, yes, just the common ordinary Jew that walks the street, deep down in his heart, he believes his Messiah's coming is soon. Now, looking at it from the standpoint of the generation that Jesus spoke of in Matthew 24, let's take a look at our country. The trends that set in. I've got it written down in a note structure here so I can keep my thoughts straight. If I did not believe, brothers and sisters, that Jesus Christ is coming in a few short years, I'd have to say, young people, there ain't no future for you. There ain't no future for you. It's as unpredictable as the weather is. But looking at it from the standpoint of the Bible, then I have to say, some of these things are already going on. It's like a disease. It's already set in. It just has not reached the chronic and epidemic stage yet. That's both in the economic, That's also in the social, because in the social realm, it's the political side of things that changes people's attitudes as to how they think or look upon a certain situation. The information that I have here in front of me, it comes from two different sources, a monetary and social economics, economists they're called, who's forecasting now a world moving toward an economic disaster. And the one source has put the next 10 years, 1995 to the year 2005. Well, we've already calculated certain things, brothers and sisters, from the book of Hosea 6:2, where the prophecy there in that verse says, after 2 days, he will revive us. If our figuring that from the crucifixion of Christ is right, that brings us, brothers and sisters, to 2004 and a half. I have to believe, brothers and sisters, we're moving. Let's don't move blindfoldly. Let's move forward, spiritually speaking. I have to say, if we will move and walk with God spiritually, not listen to every whim and whine of things that's going on, yet realizing if there's certain things that's got to be, you couldn't change it, brothers and sisters. If you cried the Pacific Ocean full of tears, you're not going to change it. Both sources are looking at this thing of $4 trillion. Think of it. I can remember in my lifetime, $1 trillion for a nation to be in debt was unthought of. I can remember when they lifted it to $450 million national debt. And we thought that was terrible. Then it wasn't long, brothers and sisters. They raised it another $150 million until finally they had it $1 trillion. And once it reached $1 trillion, brothers and sisters, then it just began to seem like it's like an epidemic. It just, every 10 years, just another big hole went into it. Their both sources are predicting it's like an old body and the heart begins to break down. And after a while, there is one gigantic heart attack. They're saying it in this light, that the interest on $4 trillion will be more than our total revenue can bring in. What then will the nation have to operate the government on? If you can't pay the interest just on the debt, how many understand what that, looking at it from the monetary standpoint? I have to say tonight, God's going to care less which way the economic factor goes, because he's going to hold everything just the way he wants it. But keep in mind, if he's already forecast there'll be a time of trouble such as there never was before, you can rest assured there are parts of this world destined to become so sick in the economic realm, there is nothing that politicians can do to change or modify it. When you live in a nation that's been looked upon by the rest of the world as the richest nation on earth, well, in one sense of the word, it is. But when all of a sudden leaders within the nation begins to feel like, because we've been elevated and we're lifted to a world position of leadership, then after a while we got the idea, then we are the world's welfare basket. And that's the way it's been. It went from the Marshall Aid to this plan and that plan, and the taxpayers of America was paying the bill while the politicians was just shoveling it out to these other nations. And it's a downright fact, brothers and sisters, most of this money never did reach the level to the people in the social structure to help them one bit. It did not put one spoon of rice in on a table in South Africa, Mid-Africa, islands of the Pacific, or anywhere else. but it put a few $1,000,000 in the treasury of those countries wherein the politicians squandered it through graft and high cost of living. That's exactly what it's done. It says as we fast slide out of the role of an industrialized nation, and brothers and sisters, this is the part that hurts you. I was just a young boy when the Depression in the 30s hit. Too young really to realize what it was all about. But I can remember hearing the older men talk how that things just went shut up. There was no money moving. Then after a while, brothers and sisters, as things began to take a turn, and we slowly began to sort of pull out. It was a long time pulling out of that terrible depression. Finally, here came then the start of World War II. As it did, the wheels of progress had to start turning. The demand for military weaponry. That's when the government bought all this land over here by Charlestown. Thousands of acres up and down along the river between there and Charlestown. I can remember when construction started over there, I was just about 13, 14 years old. People came in here from all parts of the country to work in the construction. Right here in Jeffersonville and New Albany, there was not enough rooms in hotels to house these workers that came all the way from Texas. People would open up their excess bedrooms and things. And many times they put 2 single beds in a bedroom, and these people, brothers and sisters, that have been paying on a little mortgage through the Depression years on their houses, managing to hold on. Now then, the war brought on an era of a flow of a few dollars. And with the renting of these houses, and some even converted their basements into bedrooms to house these workers. Then was suddenly plunged into the war full scale. And brothers and sisters, within 2 years' time, this nation had the wheels of its progress and industry rolling. When we come out of the World War II era, we have came from what was known as an agricultural nation to become the world's fastest producer of industrialized equipment and materials that the world has ever had. While the Japs ravaged our Navy at Pearl Harbor, and we suffered at Midway, even in the Coral Sea battle, yet by the time that war came to an end, we had rebuilt every battleship, aircraft carrier, cruiser, destroyer, and a system of freighters. We had a Navy equal to the combined Allied forces of Europe. I told Brother Stroman, I said, when we was in task force going to the Philippines, I said, I thought I'd saw a lot of boats sitting around in harbors. But my land, when them boats all got out of there and got strung out across the Pacific, now just imagine, they say when on a nice calm day when the waves aren't too bad, you can see 15 miles to the summit, all the way around. Well, you stand in the center of something or other and look 15 miles in every direction you go, and all you can see is ships. And they're not 10 miles apart. No, they're just about 700, 800 yards apart, just far enough apart to maneuver. Ships, and it was flying every flag, brothers and sisters, because when the Hitler took Norway, Denmark and them, a lot of those people, those we will say there's those maritime people, the shipping companies, every boat they had, any other part of the world, they absolutely turned it over to the United States or the Allies. And I've seen the Dutch flag flying on ships, the Scandinavian flag flying on ships, along with their crews. And we put a navy together, brothers and sisters, that was equal to all the rest of the navies in the world. And they challenged the Japanese at last, and finally, brothers and sisters, the Japanese took what few battleships that they had left. They took them on the backside of everywhere, and they hid them in the harbors. camouflaged them so our aircraft wouldn't bomb and tear them to pieces. That was an America, brothers and sisters, that almost had its back broke at Pearl Harbor, but because God still favored the nation, and he saw some determination in her, he let her rise to her feet and look the task in the face. We will say with tears streaming out of the faces and eyes of many mothers as her sons left to go to the war. God brought the nation through. What a tragedy, brothers and sisters, for the nation to fall into the hands of a bunch of politicians, leadership here, so liberal, so ornery, who had a vision they were going to change the world. Why don't they ask God about changing something other and see what God tells them? But nevertheless, they've done their role. Yes, we are sliding from the industrial nation we was, when steel mills, giant molding factories, casting all kinds of materials for every kind of an industrial piece of machinery there was on the face of this earth. As the industrialized picture fades away, it changes the economic picture, begins to become a sickness. In the major industrial cities, the big steel mills, the giant clothing factories all through the South, Taiwan, Korea, appliance factories, auto factories, agricultural equipment factories. What do you mean by that, Brother Jackson? It is this. America, after coming out of the war, they had a complex of pride. They ain't nobody can keep up with us. They ain't nobody can make a car like us. And the auto industry just began to just sit back and didn't care how much gas it gobbled. The Daytona 500, they wanted 400 cubic inch engines. And all it was gas hog, but what do we care? All of a sudden, brothers and sisters, something began to happen. These little fellows across the water over in the Orient, they begin to make these cheap gas-burning little old, whatchamacallits. Even out of Europe come the Volkswagen, the Fiat, all of these little cheap automobiles, while our industry just sitting back with their chest stuck out. It ain't never going to hurt us. And it wasn't long, brothers and sisters, it did begin to hurt us. By that time, brothers and sisters, the other little auto countries that we used to have Studebaker and all of those type, the big auto industry here swallowing them up. Didn't want them for competition, so they swallowed them up. But oh my, when the competition began to come from Japan and from France and from Italy and Germany, that was a horse of another color. It wasn't long, brothers and sisters. We had leaders, we're wanting to promote world trade. Now, brothers and sisters, keep in mind, I am only saying these things tonight to let you see what all of this is leading us to, because it's leading us to a time of trouble. It's going to be economic-wise and social-wise. Wait till you hear some of the things it's going to affect society in the end. From the late 30s, when we're coming out of the Depression, through the 60s, people left the farm, and I remember going to town, get me a good job. Now, as the change comes, and it's taken place, we are getting a reverse trend. Many businesses are breaking up into smaller units. You don't know, brothers and sisters, but we gave to the world the automobile. I know England had an automobile, but she was never able to put it in mass production as America did under old Henry Ford. They did not think this little old backward country over here could do nothing. While they were still playing around with a steam engine, it wasn't long Henry Ford said, I will make a car that they could have one in every garage. Well, he did. He made more cars than we had roads you could run them on. Because I can remember, and I suppose, Brother Pixie, you can too, when our roads up over Daisy Hill was so bad in some portions of the winter, you couldn't get that old Model T out. You'd hang up and have to have somebody with a team of horses to pull you out. The labor force we had through these years, as we went from an agricultural country to an industrialized country, is now, most of them dead, or the rest is on Social Security. Our nation is falling low in its birth rate, in the overall, what we say, the real American people, of the working element. As one factor has went, we will say, to the welfare side, many other Americans don't want any more than one child, if any. I heard that statistic not so long ago and said, by the year 2000 and something, with the birth rate as it is from the working class of people, we may have to import workers. What a shame. When we've got 252 million population. Most of our big industry that made the tractors, that was made back when we gave the world the tractor, such as the International Harvester, John Deere, Alice Chalmer, and all of these type of implements. It wasn't long till Europeans bought in. Then when they bought into our stock structure, it wasn't long then, brothers and sisters, they was having parts and things made right in Europe. And now, brothers and sisters, the German industry has bought into John Deere and Alice Chalmer. And that's why, brothers and sisters, there's hardly an agricultural piece of machinery that goes across our grain fields that you can say anymore it's an all-American instrument. Just as with the American car, wheel assemblies from Brazil, motors blocks from Japan or from Germany. There's no such thing as the all-American car. And I have my doubts there's the all-American boy anymore too. Because half of them, brothers and sisters, they don't even care less whether they're American or what. All of this has caused many of our big industries, their great big complexes sitting. And the buildings are sitting there rusting, falling to pieces, are being torn down. As these bigger instruments move, they go to third-rate countries where they set up certain, we will say, assembly procedures because of cheap labor. And the industry that used to pay here in America from $12 to $18 to $20 an hour, you can rest assured all them jobs eventually became traded off for this new era of world trade. And I know there's a lot of people say, oh, but I think it's the greatest thing that's ever happened. That's just the way you're looking at it. That's just the way you're looking at it. I'm looking at it from the standpoint that all of this is heading for a time of trouble. It's heading for a time of trouble. It's not going to bring a world era of prosperity to everybody. If it lasted for 40 or 50 years, brothers and sisters, there'll be hundreds and thousands of people in America. They may not be taken out and their heads cut off or shot, but economic-wise, they're going to be offered on the slaughter block of economic tranquility, equality, and a chance to better their life. I don't care how much they talk about education. You cannot take a society of 252 million people, brothers and sisters, and expect that everybody's going to sit behind a computer somewhere and draw $18 an hour. It's an impossibility. The great workforce that came out of World War II into the late 40s and 50s, into the 60s, when they reached the age of retirement, they either begin to die or they are now retired and living on Social Security. The last 25 years has turned America into a welfare state. Will you agree with me? I'm not against what we say real, true welfare paid to people that really needs the help. There's a justifiable place for it. But when we're just going to produce more and more little babies just to go on that, and yet expecting other people somewhere to work and pay a high toll of taxes when it's already hard for them to put bread on the table for their family, do you think in the eyes of God He's going to let a society continue on like this? Read the history of Rome. Rome became a welfare state before she fell. Rome too faced the last ditch of that. It got to where she was taxing the people. In the agricultural communities, brothers and sisters, one by one, the poor peasant farmers, they left their land. They moved to Rome to try to find or to get on welfare. In the agricultural community, people began to stop having children. Even the Roman Senate made a law. If they didn't have children, they would be penalized. Because all of these things figure into what we're looking at, brothers and sisters. She's running into trouble up the road. Yes, the welfare state that we produced has brought untold numbers of hundreds of thousands. You don't have to be a racist, brothers and sisters, to look at this picture and realize there's got to be a stopping point. Some people, long as they got a bed to sleep in nice and warm, long as they've got a table to sit to and bread to eat, they care less which way the sun goes down. But I'll tell you, brothers and sisters, in certain of our states that tonight are literally overrun with illegal immigrants drawing on the welfare treasury of the state, people are crying out because California did by passing a bill this past election. And a lot of people didn't like it. But the time has come. Society begins to, after a while, begin to be feeling pinched. And they've got to do something. Therefore, California and Florida are two coastal states that's literally been ravished by this type of an influx. Sure, those individual people, when you see them get in those boats, risking their lives to come across the Caribbean, you can say, oh, but I feel so sorry for them. How true that is. How true. But you don't realize they're coming to the one and only nation on the face of this earth that has ever had the insight how to build a kingdom wherein people could have an opportunity to become something. And then all of a sudden leaders begin to change the philosophy structure, begin to turn it into, we will say, a social type of a state, which begins bringing on high taxation. And keep in mind, brothers and sisters, Rome was taxing her citizenry throughout her domain at an all extreme trend when Rome began to crumble. These forecasters are saying, as we are forced to give in to the major change of the social, political, and economic and industrial change, cities will be turned into jungles of poor, run down, poverty-ridden, real estate, because the rich, they know now, are already leaving these great industrial cities. Through the past 50 years, when from the country they came to go to work, either in the steel mills, into the automobile industry, or in the appliance field, or we will say agricultural machinery factories, whatever it was, they were looking forward to a good job, and we can say they paid good. Because it wasn't long, these same people was buying property, they was buying real estate. They invested into homes that they paid for over the next 30 years of their lives. And now then, brothers and sisters, based on the statistics of the change, now then in many of those cities, real estate at one time sold at a high price, they can hardly sell it for the cheap price of putting on a new roof. Why? The rich are leaving. They don't want to live in them, we will say, them pest holes. There's nothing there no more. The rich are leaving. They're moving out into smaller communities where they don't have all of this competition, high taxation on industrial properties, and therefore they're breaking up the big complexes. Some of the things, if they do still keep some of their manufacturing products here, there's still certain parts of it they send to some other country where it can be produced at mass, cheap labor. Brought back in, reassembled. In the smaller breakup, as these places go into what they call high-tech, computerized run places. They've got both setups have got articles on the era of high tech. That's the part that the United States holds yet in supremacy. I tell you, brothers and sisters, you don't realize the computer today has become a thing. It's being used to handle everything from finances to nuts and bolts to how many screws there are in a car. How many grains of sand is there in a pound of sand? And when I read from these two sources what all of this computer's done, the computer that you see today in some people's homes, the daddy and mother of it all came from the U.S. military. As World War II was coming to a close, we were inventing the computer for what purpose? Not to count money. No, it was an instrument being used to calculate and fire naval long-range artillery guns. It was not till years later that as these older type obsolete computers that the Army was just getting rid of, they began to fall in, we will say, outsiders' hands to play with. It wasn't long till men began to overhaul them and change them to handle, we will say, figures. And that's the process from the military to the city bank, then to the different finance institutions, then to the college. And now, brothers and sisters, you can get on a phone and call United Airlines and say, I'd like a ticket from Louisville to Hong Kong. And in just a little bit, brothers and sisters, they tap in on that computer. They can call you back. They give you the schedule, seat number, the cost, and the time of departure and the time of return. All because it's all in that computer. These forecasters are saying as our ancient cities of the industrial era become ghost towns of the past, it will turn many of these cities into run-down slums where the poor, the homeless, and these cities will become so infested with gangs that police will refuse to go into areas where they're infested with. Now that sounds ridiculous. It almost sounds preposterous. But brothers and sisters, out of this book is words taken from some of the gang members that tore L.A. all to pieces. There's two particular rivalry gangs out there. One is called the Crypt, and the other is called the Blood Gang. They estimate there's between 70 and 80,000 of these gang members. United States Today paper, back in 1993, I believe it was, he interviewed some of these gang members. And they were challenged and asked, why did you go and ravish your own area where you lived? And the reply was, we learned our lesson. But don't forget there's going to be another time. And it won't be like this. Because we will go on down the street and we will get where the big homes are at. And it won't only just be in L.A. We'll hit every city there is across this country. All of that adds up to this, brothers and sisters. Our political leadership sat back and never thought, when they was flowing in from Latin America, when they was coming in from Asia, when they was coming in here from the ends of the world, and some got in illegally, all because they got relatives live here. Say, that justifies it. No, it don't justify it, because they didn't come here to be Americans. They come here to tap in on America's lifeline and to eventually skim the cream and the icing over the cake and then hang you because you will not agree and cooperate with them. It's an altogether different type of people coming. Sure, they're in need where they're at. This is why both of these sources, many of the rich people in America today have done read the forecast. They're leaving these large cities and they're buying real estate out into the smaller communities as things break up, because they say the day will come we wouldn't want to own nothing there. Right in this book alone, the man that writes it, when the election year was of the president, he was living in Washington, D.C. at that time, and he was jogging in a certain area. On this particular morning, there was a certain Democrat politician in Washington was a jogging also. And this politician, he was a Democrat, asked him, do you still live here? He said, yes. And the reply was, are you nuts? Don't you know this place is going to burn? Now, what he meant by that was, Washington, D.C. is becoming one of the highest crime-ridden cities in the nation. But it's also infested with gangs, underworld, and just to right around the government process, or we will say the government perimeter, is all of this real estate that political men live in. But when you begin to move back from that, is where you get out there, brothers and sisters, where the lawless are at. There seems to be no end to what they think about. Some of these new communities that are springing up in this breakup of the society, as well as the old industrial picture, this is why. Look down here at Cardin. I can remember when me and the wife was married. Outside of the old Keller Wagon Works, which became then a furniture factory, there was no industry around Cardin. But now, brothers and sisters, look, you've got two other industries in there that's putting together material to be shipped either to Ford's over here or some other part. They say this is absolutely what's taking place. Industry is breaking up from the big complexes. It tells about your financial institutions, the great big high-rise office buildings, where it used to be 20 stories, office space from the ground up. He says the day will come, they will be ghost towers. He says the only thing that will be there is old filing cabinets full of old records of a bygone era. Because everything is moving out into this high tech. Because as you can put on a microchip as many words as you could file away on so many sheets of paper. And you don't need all that building space. And it says the day will come when them giant skyscrapers that were, we will say, financial complexes of a bygone era, you won't even be able to sell them. All because. And I never realized it, brothers and sisters. But more and more now, as this breakup comes, it's a change. Going to strictly electronics. He says, many homes in the new complex. The wife, maybe the daughter, she works for a financial institution. She's a bookkeeper. She don't commute backwards and forwards to work anymore. She's got her office set right up in her home because it's all done from a computer. She can tap into the central computer right there in her home. She can take care of her work, turn it in whenever she wants to. It cuts down the overhead because he says it's coming and you can't stop it. Now, I'm feeding this all in here. This is the light part. In the new high-tech realm, where there will be these new communities, new cities, as the old cities become places of a bygone era and the gangs take over. He says the new communities will set up some of the highest, the most unique electronic surveillance equipment. And he said they won't need many police because they will not only have certain security realms, but it tells in here in one of these, in the future, automobiles made will be equipped with a certain device. It can be stolen, but you have a gadget in your hand. You can tell just exactly where that car went to. That sounds ridiculous, don't it? How many think it sounds ridiculous? But it's been going on for a long time. When they go out in the wild and they fly in a helicopter and they shoot a bear and tranquilize it, they're trying to gather statistics. How many bear are there in, we will say, a so many thousand square mile area? They go in there and they fly over and they tranquilize that bear. They come down on the ground, they get that bear and put it in a sling. They take it back to base, they give it a health checkup, check its teeth and everything. Then what do? They put a collar around it with a certain little old thing on there, brothers and sisters. Take it back out there and turn it loose. And at any time they want to, brothers and sisters, in the game reserve, they can walk right over to a map on the wall and show you that bear is in this area right now. Because that bear is carrying the thing that sends the signal. I have to say, brothers and sisters, whoever would have thought America would become so full of thieves that we have to have such a contraption on our automobiles? I can see it here. I can remember when we didn't have heaters, Brother Pixon. You can too. My, what a joy that was to ride home from Borden on a cold winter night. And you had a heater to go by. I can remember when they didn't have a radio. And, brother, we thought we was living on High Street when we got one with a radio in it. But, oh, my land alive, brothers and sisters, whoever thought our nation would become so full, infested with thieves? You'd have to have a tag on the thing to always know where it's at. I'll tell you one thing, brothers and sisters. I'm not saying this to be mean or anything. We didn't have many cars stole back in the Depression times, because if most of the people that owned them, if they ever found you, you could just expect you might be a victim of a shotgun. And there would be no court case using it. Our judicial system has helped turn this country sick. No wonder we got crime like it is. Gangs like they know they're not going to be hurt. They know that just as sure as they're born. And you young people, I hope we're all out of here before that time arrives. I never even thought that we would see an era that would become so electronic, controlled. Right now, already, we will say the machinery is in the making. As we move into this new electronic, high-tech era, they're forecasting in the next 10 years, in many places, homes will be built. And it's very possible one wall in a den room or a living room can be turned into a giant TV screen. Think of it. Not only that, but your telephone system will be hooked to a computer. Your computer will be channeled where you can pick your own entertainment. And you can take a trip around the world in an hour. 200 miles in the air. Because we are putting up there giant telescopes, satellite controlled, that will monitor every square mile of this Earth's surface. All of this comes in what we say the new, there is a code word they've got for it. I believe it's known as virtual reality. VR, they call it. And in that, you got a friend that lives in Hong Kong. You can ring them up, and on the telephone, it's just channeled through your television. There you can sit in your own living room, and they're in life-size image. Who would have ever thought such a thing would have come? But we gave it to the world. If you don't like the local entertainment that they show, all you have to do, brothers and sisters, is press a certain button, and you tune in with one of these giant telescopes. And that thing can be 200 miles in the air, and it will bring China, the Wall of China, the rainforests of South America, wherever you want to go. You don't go there, you bring it to you. And imagine a TV screen that covers a wall. And you're a secretary working for a certain bank. You don't go to bank anymore. You got your own computer, and you're sitting there doing your work, and you're taking a trip all at the same time. It sounds fantastic, doesn't it? But they tell it all in here. That's what our next progress leap in the next 10 years is going to bring. But now let me get down to some of the saddest part. There's already been 4 outstanding cases of a virus that has been medically checked by the American medical field. Little is said about it, but they both give reference to it. Right now, there seems to be in the earth certain viral strains of viruses that are coming on. And as they do, they have such a drastic effect when they come in contact with the human body. You suddenly feel it morning like you are aching, taking the flu. In just a matter of a few hours, it's done took your life. In this one, it tells about, I heard some of the old timers talk about it. Back just about 100 years back, we had a world epidemic of a flu. It took 25 million people. But because we did not have the communication systems then, 25 million people were snuffed out of the world in the cities of Philadelphia and Baltimore. 1 out of every 7 people died with this flu. As it hit Europe, when it was all over, it had taken 25 million people. From Africa, 20 years ago, there was a virus that hit. And in that period of time, brothers and sisters, it took people out of them villages by the hundreds. When the medical research in Virginia purchased a certain type of monkey, little did they realize some of these monkeys had that virus in them. Had they not isolated it immediately, so that that could not have gotten out and got into contact with human beings on the outside, we could have had just the same thing. I was reading an article here a few months ago. It's been, I believe, about 2 years now since in the Navajo Indian Reservation out in Arizona. You remember one time there was Indian after Indian suddenly starting taking sick. It had a flu-like symptoms. And the ones that did die, they just died within a matter of, say, 3 days' time. The article I read said it had every medical research laboratory in the United States on alert. And they was trying their best to try to find out what this was. It just so happens they was able to bring it under control. They quarantined those places and began to check these things out. They was able to curb it. Now I'm going to close with it, with this part of it in this manner. Too long our nation, politically, economically, has built themselves in, we will say, into what we call a security. But we don't have to worry about nothing. I can remember, brothers and sisters, back, we will say, about the time of World War II, Europeans were sending their sick here to go to our hospitals because our medical profession was the tops in the world. You could not help but be proud of them. We had a medical image, brothers and sisters, that made the world respect us. But all of a sudden, something has happened. And the hour, and you watch, the hour will be, we have become so self-secure with the technology we've had. I have to say, God will say, when you get that smart, that you think you can control it all, then I will just send something along that you can. Look at our AIDS picture. In England, a year ago, suddenly here's these individuals just breaking out with these giant scabs and sores. And as they start out in a matter of hours, they're just growing. They know now that there's certain virus, there's at least 4 viral strains of viruses now that's made its appearance in the world. And they know if them ever really do get settled down, really in humanity, that they will mutate, which means they will multiply so fast, it'll create an epidemic, and we can have thousands, even around the world, we can have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people dying in a matter of hours. All because we know not how to combat it. And when I read book of Revelations, brothers and sisters, and it tells there that in that day, and this is in the vials, you can read it, and how that God will pour out a certain vial on the seed of the beast, and still they repent not of their deeds, and yet they will blaspheme God because of their sores. I have to believe, brothers and sisters, their sores isn't because they hit their finger with a hammer. I have to believe it's because somewhere God lets something break out in this world to literally torment the human flesh. Because as man reaches the era of high-tech learning, and he's going to build himself into such an era of security that he thinks he don't need God, then I have to say God's going to ring a bell. And he's going to start getting some attention out of some people. All of this is time, brothers and sisters, with how God looks at Israel. Because if we are approaching that period of time, that there will be a time of trouble, you can rest assured there's going to be diseases break out that will probably make AIDS look like chicken pox. AIDS has its lingering defect. But there's no doubt, brothers and sisters, there's other diseases that will hit this world, all because the medical profession don't want to give honor to God or nothing. They want to, but look what we've done. You ought to thank God that he's allowed them to have this technology. But boy, when they look at that instrument and think that that's their security, I have to say there's only one thing that you got security in, and that's the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. Actually, brothers and sisters, I would hate to see the day come that actually America became just like the way a lot of the rich have lived in Mexico, when on the other side of town it is nothing but dirt floors. I've seen them, brothers and sisters, a three-sided shack with tins and boards and dirt floor. And the poor people then, when it comes a hard pour-down rain, they have to get up on blocks to keep the rain from getting themselves all wet. And I'd hate to think, brothers and sisters, a nation like we've been born in, all of a sudden, because of the greed of politicians and stuff, suddenly becomes a nation. Here's a city. Nobody wants to go near it. Ain't nothing but a bunch of infested with gangs of cutthroats and rapists and stuff like that. While out in other areas, there's people living in beautiful homes with all of this high-tech capability. And I have to say, brothers and sisters, all of that may sound beautiful to a lot of people, but I have to say, when it gets to the place when we don't have to really put any manual work out, and all we think we got to do is just press a few buttons and look at a few figures, our flesh is going to get soft. Our flesh is going to get soft. And people are going to get where they don't care about God. They can live in the beauty and the luxury and the splendor. Want to take a trip? Press a button. I like to see the giant rainforest down in South America. And boy, there you just sit there and look at it. It brings it right into you. It sounds fantastic, brothers and sisters, but that too is part of a military invention. It's right here in this letter. It's part of a military invention. How else do you think they fire these rockets? And it goes right to its target. So when you take, brothers and sisters, a TV and a computer and hook it all together, Lord only knows what that thing will do. But I have to say, the coming of the Lord is our answer for a sick world that has brought all this heartache and trouble upon it. Heavenly Father, tonight I pray, Lord, that maybe these words in some way will be an enlightenment to us, that we as man living in an hour of time, we are living at the threshold of something that God, this world will never be able to turn itself around. It makes us to realize, Lord, your coming is drawing very close. I pray tonight, Lord, may our hearts be found right in your sight. Help us, Lord, to just be simple people, to be humble people, to be honest with you, Lord, and obedient. So, Lord, just lead us and guide us. Help us above all, Lord, that our ears will be unstopped, our eyes will be open to the reality of what's going on and the world we now live in. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.